Hello, and welcome to the Massachusetts Safe Routes to School Municipal webinar, where our presenters will discuss how municipalities can benefit from the Massachusetts Safe Routes to School program. My name is Carol Cacciadorian, and I will be your webinar moderator. Joining me today are Jeff Brubaker, a planner from Tool Design's Boston office, and Diane Hansen, the Massachusetts Safe Routes to School Program Director. Jeff will provide an overview of some common safe routes to school issues, and Diane will share how some jurisdictions around the state are supporting safe routes to school. I want to go over a couple of housekeeping things first. The phone number for today's webinar is on the screen. You should already be dialed in, but if you're not, there's the phone number. And also, you do need to register for the webinar, so if you have not done so, please register now. If you're having technical difficulties during the webinar, please email Diane at the address on the screen, and I'll give you a moment to write that down. She will have her email open and will try to respond as soon as possible. Now, all participants, all attendees' phones are muted, but we do want to hear from you, and we save time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please use the Q&A WebEx function on your screen. It should be in the upper right-hand corner. And I will be monitoring all the questions received throughout the presentations, and at the end, we will get through as many of them as we can. If you have questions about other safe routes to school topics, please send them to Keith at the address shown here. And to let you know as well that we are recording the webinar and we will upload it to the Safe Routes to School website in a month or so. So let's get started. This is the agenda for today's meeting. We're in the welcome stage now. We're going to have a couple of poll questions in a moment. And then we're going to review some typical challenges for students walking and bicycling to school and consider how you can be part of the solution and also provide some statewide examples of safe routes to school work by municipal departments. Wrapping up with some Q&A. The learning objectives for today are on the screen. We want you to have an understanding of the most common concerns for students traveling to and from school, especially for students who walk or bike. We're hoping to help you understand how various municipal departments can contribute to safe routes to school, especially in partnership with schools and school districts. And we hope you come away feeling that you've learned some best practices from around the state, country, and also internationally. So before we start presenting, as I mentioned, we've got a couple of polls for you. We'd like to learn a little bit about who's here. So we've launched the poll. If you could tell us what organization you're with. We've got 5 options, and if none of those fit you, then click Other. And once you've selected, click the Submit button at the bottom. So we'll give you just another couple seconds. And we'll go ahead and close that poll. Okay, did we close the poll? There we go. So we have a lot of folks that are local government and almost an equal number that are other. 3 from schools, 3 from school districts. Okay. We're really pleased that you're here today. And now our second poll question, we'd like to get a little bit of information on the challenges that you know your students have in your community when walking and biking to school. So you can see we've got some options here that we think are pretty universal. Click the one that is most appropriate for your community. And if you click other, then please use the chat function to tell us a little bit more about that. So we'll give you another, again, click the one and press submit, and we'll give you another 2 seconds. And then we'll go ahead and close the poll and show the results. Okay. Okay. Have we closed the poll? There we go. Ooh, gaps in sidewalk network and gaps in biking network are the most common ones. More responses for that, as well as the schools on a busy road. Wonderful. These are not wonderful, but these are the things we often see, and I can see that these are common concerns for your communities as well. So with that, we're going to get started, and I'm turning this over to Jeff.
All right. Thank you very much, Carol. I'm Jeff Brubaker with Tool Design, and it's great to be here. So although we identified a lot of issues in the poll, today we're going to be focusing on these 3 issues. Drivers are going too fast. There are facility gaps along routes to school, a popular poll answer, and the school has challenges with arrival and dismissal. But know that the Safe Routes to School program has resources to help you address many different issues. So for each issue, we'll describe the problem, discuss how it can be evaluated, talk about the objectives for solving the problem, and then suggest a few collaborative solutions. Where applicable, slides will include tags with suggested departmental roles. However, every city and town does things a bit differently, so these tags are meant to be interpreted with a degree of flexibility. We just want to emphasize collaboration in addressing safe routes issues. So traffic speed is a pervasive safe routes issue. Speed has a clear influence on crash severity. If a pedestrian is hit by a car going 30 miles per hour or less, they have a generally good chance of survival. Above that, the chance of survival drops greatly, as you can see in this slide here. Also, the faster you drive, the narrower your cone or field of vision is, meaning you are less able to see people on the side of the road. So along with field of vision narrowing, when people drive 15 to 20 miles per hour, they are very likely to yield to a pedestrian. But at 30 to 40 miles per hour, they are very unlikely to yield. And this research has also been done in Boston, which found a similar correlation. So speed has an important connection with how children cross the street. Children younger than 14 tend to be less able to judge sufficient gaps in traffic due to limitations in perceptual ability and motor skills. This is especially evident in younger children. In one study in a simulated environment, 6-year-old study participants crossing a 25-mile-per-hour street had a crash rate of 8%. Faster speeds are likely to make crossing decisions more challenging. So children can be hard to see, especially when vehicles are parked right up against the crosswalk, which is probably a violation of a local ordinance, but still happens all the time. Children may be unaware that they are hard to see. They may change direction quickly or unexpectedly, and they may not be able to understand complex traffic signs. All of these tendencies combined with a higher speed environment may increase risk. So the main focus is on speeding within the school zone, the streets right around the school where the greatest number of students are likely to be walking. However, the walk mode share remains strong at distances up to 1 mile, and some schools have healthy bike mode shares within 2 miles. So we don't want to forget about those streets a little bit further away. So an early step is to identify routes and crossing locations, including those used by walking school buses and bike trains. Your Safe Routes to School coordinator can lead an active transportation assessment to identify routine walking and cycling routes, as well as routes that might be used on flagship days like Walk and Bike School Day. Typical attendees of an assessment include principals, teachers, town planners, public works engineers, parents, police, and other community stakeholders. So this is a really cooperative effort across departments with the school and with volunteers. So the conditions along these routes can be assessed through site visits or formal walking, bicycling, or road safety audits. This is another collaborative effort across multiple stakeholders, but for more formal assessments, it is important that the group include design expertise. That could be the city engineer, an on-call consultant, a MassDOT engineer, and so forth. Speed data collection is one strategy, but it's just one part of a holistic assessment of existing conditions and behavior of drivers and other road users. So this is an animated slide, and here's an example of how road design influences driver behavior. So this is a pedestrian refuge island, which is a proven safety countermeasure at the beginning of a school zone. But as drivers are leaving the school zone, the road already is opening up, and the speed limit sign cues drivers to speed up. Meanwhile, bike ped facilities drop off, even though, as you can see circled, there is still bicycling and walking demand. So while establishing a clear process to respond to speeding concerns is an important objective, I want to emphasize that it's equally, if not more important, to proactively reduce speeds around schools, primarily but not exclusively through design changes. So permanent vertical and horizontal traffic calming measures are hard to beat for speed management. This raised crosswalk in Everett was part of a menu of safe route improvements within a single project. And here's a similar example in Cambridge that combines speed management and ADA accessibility improvements. Raised crosswalks at intersections can really help visually cue drivers to take turns at slower speeds, and there's a less of an elevation change for crossing pedestrians. So you may have seen the price tags on those projects, but horizontal and vertical traffic calming measures don't have to cost a lot. You can accomplish a lot with paint and flex posts. So here I'll plug our spring webinar on April 30th that will be a deeper dive into safe routes to school and tactical urbanism. So keep an eye out for more information on that. Speed feedback signs are another low-cost strategy. Boston has been a real leader and installed about 60 of them citywide. They have been shown to reduce speeds by about 5 miles per hour and reduce the likelihood of driving over the speed limit. They have variable power options, including solar, that can be selected based on the site context. Costs vary, but a ballpark low end would be a couple $1,000s per sign. So lowering speed limits can be effective, but as part of an integrated speed management strategy that also includes designing streets for safety and slower speeds. Boston lowered its default speed limit to 25 miles per hour in early 2017, and that lowered the likelihood of vehicles exceeding 25 miles per hour. Furthermore, there was a remarkable drop in the likelihood of vehicles exceeding 35 miles per hour. So on locally maintained roads, 20 miles per hour is the statutory default speed limit in school zones. School zones must be properly established, and speed limit signs and supplemental plaques must be posted. Since school zone speed limits can only be in effect for limited hours related to arrival and dismissal, speed limits outside of school zones are also important. After all, we want our kids to walk and bike safely to other places too. So municipalities can set speed limits different than the statutory default, subject to an engineering study and MassDOT approval. The statutory default speed limit in thickly settled areas is 30 miles per hour. But as of 2016, municipalities could opt to lower that to 25 without MassDOT approval, only notification. So enforcement is an important complementary activity to deter unsafe behaviors. It's not an effective strategy to place all of the burden of solving a speeding issue with law enforcement. If the community sees design changes, if they see that the community is lowering speed limits, and if there is a collaborative education and encouragement campaign around the issue, that's probably going to give some cover and context for the enforcement campaign. In my own experience when I worked in a local government, the police department set up a pedestrian safety campaign where they warned and ticketed drivers who didn't yield at crosswalks. At the same time, we were working with regional partners on a pedestrian safety education campaign, as well as installing some safety countermeasures at one of the crosswalks. So the police were able to fold their effort into ours, and we achieved a good synergy. So how can departments work together to solve our second issue, the most popular from the poll, which was pedestrian and bicycle facility gaps along routes to school? So what do we mean by a gap? Well, it could be a general lack of facilities in the area, or it could be a short gap due to the lack of an adequate crossing at an intersection. Maybe the facilities are there, but their design poses challenges, especially for people with mobility impairments. It may be a gap due to perception. People don't feel safe or comfortable crossing a busy road, or parents don't want their kids crossing it. The route to school could be circuitous just because of the development pattern, or the gap could be due to maintenance issues. So these images show various types of gaps we're talking about. On the left, with snow removal probably on a lot of people's minds right now, the lack of a cleared sidewalk has kids walking in the travel lane. How many times do we see a new sidewalk built as part of a development stop at the property line, as in the center image? Notice the jogger in the street. And on the right, the deterioration of the pavers and garbage cans make the sidewalk inconvenient for pedestrians and impassable for people with mobility impairments. So this was a photo sent by one of these Safe Routes partners, and it just shows how a tree needed to be cut down, but after the tree was cut down, the trunk was left in the path of the sidewalk. So the kids had fun with it, but it certainly does represent a gap and a barrier to walking to school, especially for those with mobility impairments. So even if the rest of the route is comfortable, all it takes is one higher stress crossing to defer active modes. So the pedestrian in this photo is giving it a go, but you can see how parents wouldn't want their kids crossing this multi-lane arterial. And so again, a circuitous street network may lead to longer distances and more of the route exposed to higher speed arterials. So we're going to turn to evaluation now. How do you find these gaps? Well, the Safe Routes program's parent survey will tell you where kids are coming from and what modes they use, which will help inform which gaps in the network might be the most important to fill. Again, active transportation assessments through the Safe Routes program can help you find those gaps. So check with your Safe Routes outreach coordinator if you are interested. A great opportunity to identify gaps is during the development of an active transportation plan. As part of the bike ped plan we helped the town of Sandwich develop, community members could use an online mapping feature to identify existing and desired destinations, as well as barriers, and the frequency of comments is shown using heat maps. So input at public meetings is, of course, an important source of information on where gaps exist. but we're really seeing the value in incorporating public input opportunities with events and demonstration projects, meeting people where they are, and doing demonstration projects like pop-up protected bike lanes so that people can temporarily experience what it's like for the gap to be filled in the short term. So in terms of data evaluation, bicycle level of traffic stress is a simple rating system for estimating how comfortable people feel riding a bike given certain roadway conditions, such as speed, number of travel lanes, presence of on-street parking, and other factors. It's a common method nowadays that has versions for both segments and intersections, and we've used this and variants of it on different projects. For accommodating children on bikes, you want to achieve level of traffic stress 1, which is the most comfortable, and then your gaps are your LTS 2, 3, and 4 routes. So intersections with traffic signals and marked crosswalks may still effectively be a gap if they don't provide enough clearance time. Gaps related to signal timing can be evaluated to ensure the walk signal is adequate for pedestrians of different ages and abilities. As you can see in the image, kindergarten through first grade students are going to be walking only about half as fast as an able-bodied adult. So our objectives here are pretty straightforward. Complete the network, remove weak links, and increase real and perceived safety along routes. A good objective for street crossings is to make them safe, convenient, and predictable. Reduce the crossing distance, make crosswalks highly visible, locate them at desire lines, and provide adequate signage, pavement markings, and environmental cues. So, pretty simple. Sometimes it's just a matter of building a new sidewalk where none exists, and as in this case in Revere, which also added curb extensions, ADA ramps, pavement markings, and signage upgrades in the vicinity of Garfield School. So the project included striping to demarcate a no parking area, help daylight the intersection, and improve sight distance. I can't stress how important it is to keep curbsides next to crosswalks free of parked cars and other visual obstructions, at a minimum for the distances prescribed in local ordinance, but using engineering judgment and based on the site context, determine if longer daylighting areas need to be established so drivers can see pedestrians of all sizes, especially kids, as they are approaching the crosswalk or intersection. Here's a curb extension project that includes high visibility crosswalk markings spaced to avoid tire tracks, which should hopefully make it last longer. And the intersection also has a crossing guard. So the crossing distance is short and the crosswalk visibility is high, especially supplemented by the crossing guard. So this is a crossing that should be very comfortable for parents and their kids. Again, sometimes it's just a matter of simple retrofits. This retrofit project reflects a complete streets approach by prioritizing a safe, accessible, and comfortable route for people on foot over on-street parking next to an already existing off-street parking lot. And this project filled in several gaps by adding sidewalks, curb ramps, and new signage and markings as part of a resurfacing project. I know some of our partners participating are from rural areas, and in more rural areas, again, there's a lot of opportunities for gaps to be filled with simple sidewalk retrofits. As you can see in this animated slide, you can see the before image, a typical rural roadway, and then they were able to fit the sidewalk in on the roadside of the utility poles and create a better walking route. So traffic calming measures can accommodate network connections for people on foot and on bike. This partial street closure allows people walking and bicycling as well as emergency vehicles to pass through. Yes, that may mean some unlawful cut-throughs by non-emergency vehicles, but the effect is to maintain bike ped connections while offering a visual calming of traffic. And in this example from the UK, you can see the partial closure leaves a cut through for bikes and uses the extra space to provide bike parking. So again, filling in gaps doesn't have to be expensive. A protected bike lane with flex posts using the existing curb-to-curb width is going to cost about $15,000 to $30,000 per lane mile, but it will help achieve a level of traffic stress 1 and be a very comfortable facility for younger people on bikes. So always an important reminder that there are funding sources to help you budget for these gap-filling projects. You may have submitted an application for the recent round of Safe Routes infrastructure funding, but if not, keep an eye out for future rounds. MassDOT's Complete Streets funding program is available to communities that have a complete streets policy and prioritization plan, and the Mass Trails program may be a good fit if your community has an envisioned trail that would benefit one or more schools. As always, your MPOs and regional planning agencies are a good resource for seeking funding. So our third concern is arrival and dismissal challenges. One of the biggest challenges to walking and bicycling to school is simply distance. Students living within a mile of school are about 5 times as likely to walk as students living beyond a mile. And students living within 2 miles are more likely to bike than those living further. In the Boston region, the walk-bike mode share can be 1/3 to 1/2 of all school trips less than a mile, but only 1 to 5% for trips greater than a mile. So in this mass ride survey of a school in Holliston, walk and bike trips were almost exclusively within the half-mile or mile walk sheds, with school bus and personal car being the unsurprising modes at longer distances. So many factors affect the distance kids live from their schools. Proximity is a factor, but far from the only factor in school assignment. A more spread out development pattern may also increase distance to a school. And you tend to have less schools with more students going when you go from elementary to middle to high school. So that tends to increase distances just by the natural progression of grade levels. So this leads to many schools having a mix of travel modes converge during arrival and dismissal times. And the way that these modes mix can be kind of chaotic and a source of safety concerns. I'm sure many partners are very familiar with these types of situations. So our objectives include improving the arrival dismissal experience through design changes and emphasizing equity by giving every student a chance to participate in walking and bicycling to school programs, regardless of distance and ability level. So when you evaluate conditions for design improvements near a school, incorporate an assessment of the drop-off and pickup zone into that evaluation. Does it need to be relocated? Are there any design changes that can help separate walkers and cyclists from where vehicles are pulling in and out? So it's at the Mendez School in Ashland, a walk assessment involved representatives from the school, town, and MassDOT, was conducted along a current walking school bus route where students are dropped off at the Ashland Library. You were there if you attended the Fall Forum, and walk 4 blocks to the school in groups. So the walk assessment recommended early release of walkers and cyclists, ped bike safety curriculum, education and enforcement campaign to address queuing and idling that occurred along the driveway to the school, an additional crossing guard, and infrastructure improvements at 8 sites. So these assessments are a really comprehensive look into the arrival and dismissal challenges that a school faces. So I mentioned how the Mendez School has a walking school bus with a remote drop-off location. For students living further from the school, park and walk locations are a great way for them to participate. Especially consider establishing them when the school holds specific events, such as on the 3 Massachusetts Safe Routes to School flagship days. Park and walk locations should be 1 to 2 blocks from school along an accessible route that provides adequate crossing time for a group of kids. It's great when the principal or another school official can walk or wheel with the kids, and the police department may be able to contribute as well. The location can be a public parking lot or a private business that wants to be a partner. So schools can create challenges to maximize walk and bike to school participation, like this school in North Vancouver, British Columbia, who seeks to achieve 100% active modes once per week during Freedom Fridays. For those who live too far to walk, there are designated drop-off zones, as you can see in the picture, that are a 5-minute walk to the school. And they've been able to achieve over 80% active mode share. Here in Massachusetts, Walking Wednesdays and the 3 annual flagship days are great opportunities to try this. So those of you on the webinar may get a call from schools to coordinate events for these days. So a key to park and walk locations is generating maps that make clear where the drop-off points are, as seen here with McCall Middle School in Winchester. If free coffee just happens to be a feature of those drop-off locations, I bet parents would appreciate that. Crossing guards play an important role not only for student arrival dismissal safety, but in the school community as well. They help children safely cross the street, reminding drivers of the presence of pedestrians, serve as eyes on the street, and they set a positive example for children. They may also be able to report when there are parked cars or other visual obstructions proximate to the crosswalk. So if you are not already aware of the crossing guard reference, the training video, excuse me, and presentation, check them out at the enforcement page of the Safe Routes website. So finally, one of the answers to arrival dismissal safety concerns that arose in Europe was school streets. Simply closing off the streets to motor vehicles during arrival and dismissal times. The idea originated in Bolzano in northern Italy, where it has been running for decades. School guides put out the closure signs each day and walk with the kids to school. It's a partnership between the municipality, police, the schools, and volunteers. It's worked. Crash rates have fallen by half. And the idea has now spread to other parts of Europe, such as the UK, where at least at one school, in addition to closing the road, they literally rolled out the red carpet. But it's not just a European example. Barriers for school streets can be made from simple components, such as signs and pylons, or simple barriers with signs. To municipalities concerned about labor costs of doing this every day, consider partnerships to share responsibilities, or consider a pilot program for a small number of days, such as Safe Routes flagship walk and bike to school days. And with that, I will turn it over to Diane.
Thanks, Jeff. In our outreach coordinators' work throughout the Commonwealth, they provided me with 3 examples of municipality or department within that's working to support the efforts and goals of Safe Routes to School. As you can see, we selected examples from different areas of the state in order to showcase a variety of communities. So you can see Lexington is the green star just northwest of Boston. Traveling further west, the red star represents Hudson. And lastly, the yellow star is Longmeadow, a community in the Pioneer Valley. Our first example comes from Lexington and our outreach coordinator, Judy Crocker. Judy is also attending this webinar and is available for questions during Q&A. In 2005, the Board of Selectmen of Lexington created a sidewalk committee with several charges, 2 of which specifically support Safe Routes to School. One is to work with the schools to sustain a Safe Routes to School program, and 2 was to recommend policy and bylaws. It was important that the members came from other municipal departments like DPW, planning, and engineering, so that they could support any action that came from the committee. Our outreach coordinator was actually the chair of this committee for many years. By putting Safe Routes to School into a municipal committee, it remains a fixture in the schools, regardless of turnover within the school or the district. The committee was also able to recommend policy and bylaws, which helps sustain the efforts of the Safe Routes program. One example Judy shared from the committee is that they kept a working list of sidewalk issues brought to the committee by residents and town employees alike. As DPW went about their daily tasks in maintaining the town, they would refer to the list and see what could be done with their resources for the day. For example, if they had extra asphalt from a job, they would use it to address the sidewalk issue from the list. This was a very successful way of maintaining Safe Routes to School. Thanks, Judy, for this great example of a municipality supporting the Safe Routes to School program. Our second example comes from Senior Outreach Coordinator and Statewide Lead, Emily Badzinkowicz. Longmeadow, and more specifically, Traffic Safety Sergeant Carl Mazzaferro, has been a longtime supporter of Safe Routes to School. We are delighted to have Carl on the WebEx, and he can answer any questions about his efforts during our Q&A. Longmeadow has 4 school buses for 7 schools, and most kids walk or bike to school. Carl recognizes the important role the police department has in supporting children walking and biking safely to school. He applied for a grant from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security and received funds for bike and ped safety enforcement. I believe this grant helps cover labor and equipment, but Carl can get more specific if anyone has questions about how his department uses the grant funds. Thanks, Carl, for your efforts in Longmeadow and for keeping walkers and bikers safe while traveling to and from school. Our last example comes from Outreach Coordinator Rachel O'Donnell. In her meetings with Hudson, she learned of Eric Ryder's history with Safe Routes to School in New Hampshire. As a result of his successful initiatives as the Director of Public Works, he plans to bring this knowledge to Hudson as the Safe Routes program grows. His Green Line project was very successful in New Hampshire. They painted green lines along walking school bus routes and created complementary signage to communicate the routes to the public. The DPW also established priorities for plowing around the schools and walking school bus routes. Some of the lessons Eric learned from this exercise are that sometimes schools don't realize the time and resource limitations of DPW, especially during snow events. If schools were to increase their walking and biking to school, it means more sidewalks need to be plowed and maintained. So that means it's imperative that schools coordinate with DPW to plan the best routes for a walking school bus or a bike train, especially regarding maintenance for snow removal. DPW should also be present for all walking school bus audits, as well as planning and engineering folks. As Eric also mentioned to Rachel, DPW can help address accessibility when students are walking or biking, so always involve them when planning the routes. We may have some attendees from Hudson on the call that can answer questions, but I know Rachel is also on the call and can talk a little bit more about the efforts in Hudson. And now I will turn the presentation back to Carol for some important announcements and Q&A.
Thank you very much, Diane and Jeff. That was a really informative presentation, and I always learn something new when I am listening to other folks talk about Safe Routes to School, even though I've done a lot of work in it. So now we've got some questions. We have a couple questions I want to toss out for either Jeff or Diane or Judy or Sergeant Mazzaferro or Eric or Rachel. The first question is, so there are communities that are busing kids to a location where they continue on walking, and this is about the park and walk. And this question says, I'm not sure I understand the benefit of this process. Does it just reduce congestion at the school?
That's a great question. Yes, it does help reduce congestion at the school, but it also gives all students the ability to walk to school or to walk part of the way to school. So even if they are busing, they get the opportunity to go out, get some exercise, and walk along the route with maybe some of the other students that are on a walking school bus route.
And I would just add to that it's a great question. I would just add to that you know, a lot of schools are going to be down a longer driveway. I believe it's the case at the Modesto School in Ashland. And so if you establish a park and walk location that's as part of the regular street network, that just means less vehicles needing to traverse that long driveway and go back out. So I think there's multiple benefits in addition to the inclusion of all students that Diane mentioned to walking school buses.
Those are great answers. Thank you. We have another question that says, the challenge in our town is really narrow roads that don't have a shoulder or a sidewalk right now. What are some of the ways that that can be addressed in terms of providing a good, safe walking environment for students?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's true of a lot of communities across the state. Obviously, right-of-way considerations are very important as to how feasible it is to retrofit some of these narrow roads that lack facilities. But there may be alternative routes, and there may be some facilities that are simply more feasible due to greater right-of-way to provide those retrofits. So I know that across the state you can see case studies of rural areas, for example, who have successfully done these sidewalk retrofits on simple two-lane roads that lacked any facilities before.
I would also say that a park and walk in this type of situation too, as you get closer and closer to the school where there may be some sidewalk facilities, that would be a great option for this. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's what Jeff said, and sometimes you're just going to have to take the bus or get driven to school depending on how rural the community is, but yeah.
Yeah, and just finally, I just to kind of recap that, I mean, you know, there's definitely routes out there that are going to be a challenge, whether it be due to right-of-way or location of utilities or so forth. So you really want to assess those routes and assess the feasibility of those to determine, you know, where is best to locate the sidewalk that accommodates existing or latent demand for walking to school.
Okay, thank you. I'm also wondering if Eric Ryder, who's a Public Works Director, has some suggestions. Is it possible for Eric to unmute?
Right now we're checking to see if Eric is on the call. We didn't get confirmation if he would be able to attend this call, especially given the amount of snow that we had yesterday. We certainly appreciate everyone from DPW who's attending the call. If somebody does have a question for Eric, you can just chat it into the chat window, and we'll get back to you offline when Eric becomes available.
Okay, thank you. We do have a couple more.
Oh, sorry, Carol. I think the same is true for Sergeant Mazzaferro. Okay. I don't believe he was able to make this call at the last minute unless we see him pop up on the screen, but we'll certainly get any questions to him and respond back to the attendees. Okay,
thank you. We do have a few more questions. Somebody has said they're from a small community, and it seems like the examples that we've showcased today are from larger school districts. This person has a school with 145 students. About 70 come from town, and the rest arrive on a school bus. So is a park and walk program helpful perhaps for those 70 students or these 75 students that come on a school bus? Or are there some other examples from small communities?
Yeah, I would say a park and walk is certainly one of those ways that you can increase student participation and make them feel included. Obviously, a lot of rural communities face the challenge of some students living a further distance from school than is typical for walking, as you saw in those slides. The walk and bike mode share really drops off after 1 to 2 miles distance from school. So yeah, I would definitely agree that a park and walk may be a great solution, whether that's students who are driven to the park and walk location, or students who get dropped off by the school bus at the park and walk location.
I also want to point out that, that establishing a park and walk is a great way to partner, for the school to partner with the municipality and with a lot of the organizations around the school, because you do need to have a parking lot location large enough to accommodate cars and buses to be able to drop off, and a friendly business or a municipal lot. Oftentimes it's a lot that it's a municipal-owned lot that maybe is not currently being used, but there's a lot of interaction that has to happen with the municipality and the businesses around the area that can help support. And Jeff was joking about the coffee, but I do believe that there is an example of where in a park and walk location, vendors started to show up and have coffee carts or trucks to help feed the hungry parents and guardians that were there to drop their kids off. So it really is a group effort.
Yeah, it is. And it doesn't have to be every day. It can be one day a week. It can be twice a month or once a month. But it's really a good way to allow kids that don't live within an easy walking distance to participate. So we have kind of a related question. Speaking of park and walk location, what are good lengths of park and walk distances from school? We have some examples, but what is kind of an ideal length?
Yeah, again, this is Jeff. I just chime in and say 1 to 2 blocks, or I think 5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I've actually seen them as far as 3/4 of a mile, just because the location was ideal to accommodate the buses and the cars. So, for our walk shed, when we do a walk analysis, it's really within a mile of the school that we look as a safe and comfortable walk to school distance. So it ideally can be upwards of a mile, but usually half a mile is probably a good bet where you're going to get folks participating.
Okay. So once the students get to school, we talked about some car-free zones, and someone has asked if they're, in other words, closing the street off in front of the school or on two sides of the school, and someone has asked if there are any legal barriers to doing this. For example, are school buses required to drop students off in certain areas, say the curb next to the school?
That's a great question.
Yeah. I would say that our number one goal when we do a arrival dismissal audit, and the number one sort of safety goal, is to separate the modes of arrival. So bikers and walkers, folks being dropped off or picked up by private cars, and then busing. So when separating the modes, you want to try and have them, either by time or by distance in terms of where they're arriving. So we could probably get back to you with a more concrete answer, but it may also depend on the municipality and what's going on around the school and who maintains and owns the roadways around the school. So we will get back to you with any specific answers to that, but I would say, first of all, look at separating the modes either by distance or by time in terms of arrival and dismissal.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if I'm not mistaken, the Ashland example, the school bus does drop off at the park and walk location, so I think they've been able to make that work, but like Diane said, I think we can get back to you with a more detailed response to that very great question.
Okay. Now, Eric Ryder may not be on the call because of the snow that you all received yesterday, but he did bring up the issue of clearing snow on sidewalks, and we have a question related to that. It's sort of the priority. The person that asked this question said the sidewalks are the last on the list for Public Works to clear. What needs to happen to change that order? And more broadly, what does it look like for Public Works and a successful program that supports sidewalk snow clearing? Is it cost neutral? Is it a good PR? Does it help reduce the number of slips and falls for people walking?
Yeah, another great question. Obviously, as Diane mentioned, the Public Works departments are really limited in resources when it comes to snow clearing. You know, she mentioned the Lexington example. That might be a good one to explore further. And then another example of a resource that you might be interested in is the Municipal Resources Guide for Walkability, which MassDOT produced as part of its statewide pedestrian plan. That does have a section on best practices for snow removal to accommodate pedestrians. So I'll leave it to others who want to chime in, but that's just what I wanted to say on that point.
And I will say, too, that there's a transportation planning pyramid that talks about planning for, you know, pedestrians and bicyclists and sort of goes down to the road level, where oftentimes the maintenance is done at the reverse of the pyramid, where we're plowing the roadways first, then we're considering the sidewalks. I think with Hudson and with the example there of what happened in New Hampshire is when the school routes were actually identified, the safe routes to school routes were identified, those routes were actually plowed first because we knew that kids were walking and biking along those routes. So it's really important to have DPW speaking with the school and making sure that they're planning together. So it does come down to policy in that if the municipality has a policy that snow removal on sidewalks will occur first, then that's the best way for that to happen.
Right. And that's related to a comment that someone sent in that said, why not have all students drop off at a parking lot space, a safe zone, and all walk together? That would work for both small and large schools. And it seems that if that parking lot is identified and supported by the municipality and the route to school is identified, then that becomes the sidewalk that is cleared first or early in the clearing process.
I think that would be an ideal situation. We would love to see entire schools, you know, walking that last bit to school. It certainly has health impacts, not only for the students who get out to exercise, but it's reducing the congestion around the schools.
Right, right. So we've got a couple of requests for information, which I will forward to Jeff and Diane. One is requesting information to justify reasons for setting up a park and walk outreach, and then another is wanting to know the process to request an assessment for a safe routes to school evaluation for a sidewalk improvement. We also, yeah, go ahead.
I was saying, you can speak to the second really quickly. Definitely, if you are requesting a walking assessment, you can reach out to your outreach coordinator. If you don't know who that is, the Safe Routes to School website, which is mass.gov/safe routes to school, and I think we've flashed, yep, right up there on the screen. If you go to the contact page, there's actually a handy map of Massachusetts, color-coded to who your coordinator is. And if you click on that coordinator, you'll be taken to an email address, and you can reach out to them directly, either to begin your partnership with us or also to request a walk assessment.
Thank you. So somebody rightly pointed out that when kids walk or bike to school, the quote here is get it out of their system. I work with somebody whose son, when walking to school, says he gets his wiggles out before he gets in the classroom and is more ready to learn. In this person's community of Springfield, it's less possible because of charter schools with parents trying to drop off students directly at school. So what has your experience been working with schools, charter schools or other private schools where walking or biking is not quite as possible because students don't live within the typical attendance zone?
So one of the things that we encourage for cases like that are walk at school events or before the morning bell to get a walking path established around the school where kids that are dropped off, and this speaks to the different times and spacing of arrival and dismissal. If the buses are arriving a little bit earlier or the drop-offs are happening a little bit earlier, you can get those kids out into on the school campus walking a path. And I've seen schools, I've seen in particular in Wellesley, there's a walking path around the school, and each time a kid makes a loop, they get to stop by the PE teacher and grab a little like shoelace or some little encouragement item. So there are activities that can happen at school, whether they be walking Wednesdays or walk at school events every single day before and after school.
Okay, thank you. We are close to the end. I think we have two more questions. One is really a clarification about the walking assessment. Someone has said, my understanding is that an arrival and dismissal assessment is different than a walking assessment. Is this still the case with Safe Routes to School?
That is correct. We do have two different types of assessment. We do have a walking, school bus, and bike train assessment, which will look at the areas around the school and determine what the best routes to and from school are. And then an arrival dismissal audit takes a look at your, what happens, you know, the hour or so or the half an hour or so leading up to arrival and dismissal, and then provides recommendations, whether they be programmatic or infrastructure, to help support a better arrival and dismissal for the school.
Okay. So last question was the reason why school departments cannot clear the snow from parking lot and the drop-off area themselves, even if the sidewalks aren't clear. I guess the broader question is the role, how schools and municipalities can work together to make the pathway and the arrival and drop-off areas clear.
I think it goes back to ownership of the roadways, and that having that conversation with DPW to say, okay, who owns this portion of the sidewalk leading up to the school, and then obviously on school property, that's a separate issue. So I think each municipality handles it separately, but you really need to have a conversation with your own facilities department, what their expectations are for snow removal, and then also reach out to DPW to see if they have any extra bandwidth or if they have the ability to come in and assist with that.
And it seems like those efforts need to be coordinated, so you don't have one thing clear and the other thing not clear. Absolutely. As well. So.
That's right.
Well, I am sad to say that we have run out of time for today. If you have any follow-up questions, here are our email addresses where you can reach us. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be posting the webinar, the recording, on the Safe Routes to School website. It may take us a few weeks to a month to get it up because there's a process to getting that recording ready to be replayed.
Yes, we do actually make our, we do make our recordings accessible. So that's what takes so long, is we do caption all of our webinars. So it just takes a little bit of time to get that up and captioned for accessibility.
Right. And for those of you who are familiar with Safe Routes to School or maybe not and are excited to continue participation, these are some four events that are coming up. We have a yard sign contest, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. I also want to promote again the Technical Urbanism webinar that will be on April 30th at 10 a.m. It's one of the really interesting ways to help people experience different temporarily built environment for walking and biking to school. And then May 1st is a flagship day, the Massachusetts Walk, Bike, and Roll to School Day. And then at the end of May, there's a Safe Routes to School Awards ceremony. So participate in as many of those as you can, please. And that's it for today. Thank you for your participation, all of your questions, and stay in touch. You've got the contact information, and so please continue to be involved. Bye-bye.
I would like to say there is a brief survey at the end, so as you're leaving the webinar, please make sure that you answer the survey so that we can provide the best webinars in the future. Thank you.